Hello there, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you here at the ORCIT conference. Now, I wasn't able to come to Thessaloniki in order to speak to you in person, but fortunately, I have been able to prepare this presentation in advance for you to view there. So, what am I going to talk about? Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be talking about how I personally use online educational resources, including ORCIT, in order to teach conference interpreting as part of an online course that I give. So I've got 15 minutes for the recorded part of the presentation, after which I can connect with you all on Skype and we can take any questions and I can show you any other resources that you may want to live. Good, so let's get started. So what are we going to do in this session over the next 15 minutes? First of all, I'll tell you a few things about the Glendon MCI, or Masters of Conference Interpreting, which is the first completely online master's program in conference interpreting. And that's where I use primarily the online educational resources. We'll also be taking a tour of the course that I teach on the Glendon MCI, although we won't be doing that as part of this recorded presentation. I can do that live with you afterwards on Skype. I'll be showing you the structure of a typical lesson module that I would give as part of this online course. I'll tell you a little bit about how and why I use online educational resources such as ORCIT and how they're built into the lessons. And then finally, I'll just try and briefly review some key pedagogical considerations that I've found are important for me as I'm teaching online. So first of all, first and foremost, what is Glendon's MCI, or Master of Conference Interpreting? As I said a moment ago, it is the first online MA level program of its kind in the world. It's a 2-year program. The first year is taught 100% online, and it includes training in both healthcare and legal or court and conference interpreting techniques. So it includes all 3 streams. The second year is taught in a blended format. Most of it is taught on-site in Toronto, which is where the program is based, with visiting trainers who will often also teach online over the course of the year. And in that second year, the focus is only on advanced conference interpreting techniques. And really, the second year is modeled very much on the EMCI format, the European Masters of Conference Interpreting. That was used to design it, and many of the trainers who teach on the Glendon program also teach on EMCI programs. Which brings me to the next point, which is that it does have a pool of international trainers from all around the world who collaborate in order to cover in the various languages that are offered. Perhaps I could just briefly review that. The Glendon languages are English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and Arabic at the moment, with German and Turkish, well, German having been added this year and Turkish potentially also as well. Now, looking at the course that I teach as part of this Glendon MCI, I teach a first-year program called Fundamentals of Conference Interpreting. It's an entry-level course, so it really teaches the basics of conference interpreting. It's meant for people who have no interpreting experience and who are really just getting their first taste of conference interpreting. It consists of 24 modules, each of which lasts 1 week, and which are taught over the course of the full 8 months of an academic year. So starting in September and ending in April, which is the Canadian academic calendar. The delivery of this course, because as I said, it's a 100% online. Students are located all over the world, as well are the teachers. The delivery is through a learning management system. In this case, it's Moodle-based. It's something that York University has developed for the entire campus, which we use. And we also make use of the remote conferencing platform Adobe Connect, which we have a license for. That's for teaching all of our live classes remotely. So what are the purposes of this particular course? I'm talking now about the fundamentals of conference interpreting that I teach online using online educational resources and other resources. Firstly, well, there's 3. Firstly, to, again, just give students a brief introduction to, just a taste of, the skills underlying consecutive and simultaneous interpreting techniques. Secondly, to help students acquire the tools they need in order to develop these skills through practice. So we talk a lot about reflective practice, self-assessment, feedback, and really all of the tools that conference interpreter training, students in conference interpreter training need in order to develop their skills. And finally, to have students think about the various facets of the conference interpreting profession. Remember, at the end of my course, at the end of the first year, students won't yet be conference interpreters. They will have simply had an initial introduction to consecutive and simultaneous technique, and they'll know what the profession entails and what more they need to do in order to become conference interpreters. And how do I do this? Well, through a combination of different things, through live online classes, which I hold fortnightly, through practical exercises, which are ongoing throughout the year, again, through reflective practice, group work. I have students meet every week in partners and groups in order to run through exercises, and also, of course, through theoretical modules, so looking more at the more theoretical side of what's going on in conference interpreting as we learn it. Just looking very briefly at some of the things that I do with these students. Again, a lot of our work takes place in the form of activities that they often will carry out on Skype or on whatever other platform they wish to meet on. This takes the form of extra practice that I'll assign for them in groups of 2 to 3, which generally they'll do after we've done the lesson of the week in order to reinforce the lessons learned. And you'll see when I give you a tour how, for instance, I might start a week talking about listening and analysis. We'll go through a module, and then I'll have them work together in groups in order to reinforce, say, the learning of the listening and analysis. Over the course of these activities, they'll be giving each other speeches, they'll be interpreting those speeches, we'll be running role plays, they'll be doing site translations, all the sorts of things that you would do in a face-to-face course as well. They'll be run with either mixed language groups, so I might have an exercise where Arabic students are working with Mandarin students. Oops, I think I forgot to say that Mandarin's also included. Well, we have Mandarin as well. Or the French and the Spanish students are working together, say, for instance, on an exercise that's language independent. Or I'll have other exercises where they work in a single language, where they're asked, for instance, to work specifically on a particular language combination, say, doing a Portuguese into English interpretation. And always, after all of the activities, they're encouraged to report back. This would be either on an online forum, or submitting their results to me, or posting them maybe in a discussion thread, and commenting on their classmates' work, and so forth. They also, every week, have to do individual activities. This is work that they carry out on their own, in their own time. And here is where OERs really come into their own. So the online educational resources that are out there tend to play an important role here. I'll assign them, for instance, work with interactive modules and slideshows, such as ORCIT, which we all know quite intimately. Also, work that's been done by the National Network for Interpreting in the UK. Individual activities might also include exercises from textbooks. I assign the textbook. They have 2 textbooks that they have to work from, and I might say, please, do the assignment on page 33 of mind maps, or, and analyze this speech according to the exercise in chapter 4. These sorts of things they'll also do on their own. They do a lot of self-assessed practice, which means I give them an assignment, they try it on their own, and then they report back on how it went. Here on the slide you see one exercise is the Goldilocks zone, where I have them play, for instance, with décollage, and try and find really that sweet spot where the décollage works just right for them. That's something they can try on their own and then report back on. And again, with all activities, everything we do on this course, we're always reporting back in the form of a forum comment, or they're submitting the results to me, or posting them for their classmates to review. There's a lot of other things we do on our LMS. We might have brainstorming sessions that are run on a forum. I might have them share the notes from their consecutive notepad. I might then maybe brainstorm on sharing symbols. I might encourage them to reflect on maybe the reading of the week, or collaborate, or give each other feedback in other ways. I'll also have them periodically write in a journal, which, the aim of which is to have them set goals for themselves and maybe to take stock at where they are on the way to reaching those goals. And a couple of times a year I'll also run surveys where I'll ask them to give me feedback specifically on how the course is going, on the form the course is taking, and how it can be improved. So all of that is built into the format of these weekly lessons that I run. I'm just going to really briefly look through at what a typical lesson might look like. it has 3 parts. The first part always starts with a list of the learning outcomes. So I tell students, what are our goals for this week? This is what we want to achieve by the end of the week. The second part, which is the main body of a typical lesson module, is what I call the roadmap. And this is a sequential list of all of the activities that I would like them to carry out for me over the course of that week. You'll be seeing this if I'm able to give you a guided tour later. Over the course of the roadmap, students are exposed to concepts. So, the first exposure to, for instance, say symbols for note-taking. I then assign a mix of activities which let them try it out. Maybe, try out some new symbols, compare symbols, pool their symbols, say. And they're always then reflecting and reporting back on how those experiences went. And then finally, I always have a little section in each weekly lesson module that tells them not to forget certain things like upcoming exams or important dates that are coming up and these sorts of things. And that's what a typical lesson will look like. And again, I'll be happy to show you. Not now. I think what I'll do is I'll show you that live in a moment when we meet together on Skype. So let's bring me now, the couple of minutes I've got left, to why I love ORCIT so much. And I really want to spend a couple of minutes talking about this because I do tend to use ORCIT modules quite extensively. Firstly, because they help me flip my online classroom. They means that I'm allowed to take the theory out of our class time discussions. With ORCIT, they can work through the theory on their own. They can engage with the material. And then they can come back to me and they can report on their experience. We can talk about flipping classrooms again, if you like, in more detail in a moment in our discussion. But ORCIT's great for that. ORCIT also adds structure to my course. I can pick a book off of this library shelf and I can help it create a structure that then my course is built on, starting with the listening and the analysis and moving through to basic consecutive note-taking and then onward to introductory simultaneous. And ORCIT's really good for that because it's got a structure that's very close to my own way of teaching. ORCIT's great for improving levels of interaction and adding variety to classes as well. I'm not going to do an ORCIT module every week, but every couple of weeks I'll throw one in there and it'll be something new for the students to try out. Certainly improves student engagement because they're engaging with the material very interactively, which is great. It's better than a reading. I love readings, but you know what? There's only so much you can get from black and white text in a textbook, right? It's extremely practical. So it is theory, quote unquote. It does talk about certain things from a theoretical standpoint, but it's always with examples and it's always really very concrete. And since I'm a practical trainer, well, again, ORCIT's very close to the way I like to teach anyhow. And it's very easy to personalize because if a student comes to you with a particular problem, you can say, oh, you know what? There's this ORCIT module that will help you keeping calm. And you can direct them then to a particular resource that will really meet their needs that they're facing at that moment. There's other OERs out there, of course. It's not all just ORCIT, and I use a blend of different resources that are out there. And I find that these are useful for a number of different reasons. And here I'm thinking about things like SkickTrain and other video blogs that are out there and podcasts and all of these things. I find they're useful to help take learning to the next level because ORCIT, like it or not, tends to be very targeted towards beginners. There's not a lot of advanced work on there. I've talked to ORCIT people about this before and they told me that no, well, the advanced stuff, it's all in the works. One day we'll have advanced simultaneous technique on that bookshelf, but we're not there yet. But in the meantime, I need other materials in order to get me to that more advanced level, and that's what I use them for. Other online resources will also offer testimonials and expertise, interviews with professionals and these sorts of things. They show interpreters in action, send somebody to the European Parliament portal. Fantastic. They can actually listen to the web streams and see how it works. But just one request for everybody who's producing OERs out there, please make the videos shorter. My students can't manage 20-minute videos. The very most they can manage is 2 or 3 minutes, and that's already sometimes a bit of a stretch. I do want to talk about some pedagogical considerations. I'm going to have to wrap up this recording, though, because I see I'm reaching the end of my 15-minute limit, so I'm going to stop this now. I'll start a new recording, and I'll just take a couple of minutes at the end in order to go through some of the key pedagogical points that I think are extremely important when it comes to using OERs and teaching in general. Thank you very much. Hello there, and thank you very much for inviting me. So at the end of my first video, I was just wrapping up and I was going to share with you some pedagogical considerations. In other words, some of the things that I've learned works particularly well when teaching online and using online educational resources. And I'll take a couple of minutes to do that with you now. So what would we like to do? First of all, as I've already said, we need to flip it. Everybody these days is talking about the merits of the flipped classroom, and I can only echo all of those comments. Flipping a classroom means taking the theory out of the face-to-face interaction between an instructor and a student, and bringing the practice then into that shared space. At least that's how I've always understood the concept of flipping. And I found really, I've flipped so much the work that I do that I spend very little time at all with the students lecturing to them about any particular point related to the learning of interpreting skills. Generally, the only lecture style bits I might do might be if questions come up and then I end up having to explain something in a little bit more detail. But most of our face-to-face work is really extremely practical, and I really can only sort of sing the praises of that type of an approach. And again, OERs are extremely useful in helping you get the theory out of that shared space and into a space that they can engage with on their own. Another thing that's extremely important is this whole idea of focusing on one thing at a time. I know everybody is always saying that multitasking is unavoidable these days, but I tend to take a different view of that, and I think really that we make the most of our time when we dedicate it to one particular objective. This is reflected in the idea of objective-based learning that's, again, adopted quite a bit in the conference interpreting field. The idea that you need to break down a very complex skill that is interpreting and address each individual skill in separation, in isolation, and then build those skills back up into something that then becomes a more complex technique. And I can only agree with that. And again, it very much lends itself to the online approach, giving individual modules on individual aspects of a complex technique. Very important is to make what it is you're teaching very logical and structured. And when I say logical and structured, it means not just for you, not so that it makes sense to you in your own mind, but so that it really can be easily grasped by others. And the only way to achieve that is really through trial and error. Build it in a certain way that you think is clear and then try it out on people. And if they come back to you and say, I don't know where to click, or what do you want me to do, or what comes next, well, then it means you probably need to structure it a bit differently. And again, through various iterations, I found that color coding, numbering of items in instructions and such tend to be very useful ways of structuring material for learning online. Offer students manageable chunks to work with. Now you might say, how big is a manageable chunk? Well, how long is a piece of string? But I think something is manageable if it can be dealt with easily in, say, an hour to an hour and a half. Anything longer than that, and students will probably lose their focus. Anything shorter than that, and you might not really be making the most of the fact that they've sat down in a headspace where they're willing and able to engage with the material that you're offering them. So I try to always make sure that I'm offering them chunks that are somewhere around an hour to an hour and a half, so they can really sit down and get something out of the time. So it might be, for instance, an ORCIT module plus then a reflective activity, something that they can get through in the space of an hour or so. And then when they need to, they get up, they take a break, stretch their legs, grab a cup of coffee, and then they come back and they do another manageable chunk of work for me. Create clear expectations, extremely important for online students. I think it's extremely important for everybody, whether it's face-to-face students or anybody else in this world, that you need to know what is expected of you. But it's been proven that online students tend to feel more anxiety in this area. They're more uncertain about where to click and what to write and where to write it and these sorts of things. And so sometimes you really need to say things twice or three times to make it absolutely clear what it is that's expected of them. And again, then also give them a little pat on the back when they've delivered it. And this brings me to my next point, which is be sure to reward effort as much as possible, frequently and profusely, especially in the beginning. When students who are already feeling anxiety about expectations and about meeting the expectations do manage to meet those expectations, then by all means tell them so. This is sometimes hard to do in a context where you're expecting people to learn a complex skill, and very often they're failing, especially in the beginning. You know, they're not doing it the way it's meant to be done, but that's all part of the learning process. So reward them for just trying. And I'll just give you a specific example that illustrates this quite well. I just finished my first week of classes of the first term with my online students just last week. And I went in over the weekend to see how many people had managed to complete the activities that had been assigned. And I saw that of 24 students I think I have this year, 8 had managed to write a journal entry. But instead of going to them and saying, you know, look guys, there's 16 of you who haven't done your homework yet, I framed it differently, and I wrote an announcement to all of them saying, this is great. I see that 8 of you have already managed to figure out how to find the journal, how to open the activity, and you've managed to give me some input through the journal as to, you know, where you're at on this course and what your expectations are. Fantastic. And I didn't say anything about the 16 who hadn't done it yet, but in response to that, I got a bunch of emails from people saying, oh, you know, I'm not one of those 8, and I'm really sorry, and I'm trying to get on top of things, and it's the first week, and this and that. So the message was received, but in a positive way, and I was really rewarding the people who'd managed to achieve something which may have seemed quite basic, but in the beginning can actually really be a challenge for online students. Now, another thing that I think and have found is important in my teaching approach is that I often try and let students figure it out for themselves. Which means what? Which means I'll ask them a question and I'll let them figure out the answer to it before I start lecturing at them about what I think is right. I might ask a question like, what do you think the interpreting process consists of? And then I let them battle it out in a discussion forum or in an activity. And then they come to me with what they think they've come up with, and then we discuss it and we see what the experts have written about it, and we do a reading on it. But first they've had a chance to try and figure it out for themselves, and some interesting stuff comes up. Or in past years I've asked students, what do you think good feedback is? You know, what kind of feedback helps you when you're working with your classmates? And they can come to me and they figure out for themselves what they think is good feedback. And actually once I had such good experiences with having them do this, that I had the students themselves actually develop the feedback and assessment form for their own exams, because they really came up with an excellent solution. And seeing that they had built it themselves and that they'd figured it out for themselves really allowed them to own this, and they were able, I think, to be much more engaged with the whole assessment process because it's something that they'd defined according to their own standards, which, as it happens, were my standards as well. But they'd figured it out for themselves. Second last point, keeping it positive and supportive. Again, you know, a smile can go a long way, and I'm a much more carrot than stick kind of a person, and I found that serves me well. And finally, last but not least, have some fun. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't play a game in order to teach what is a very serious concept, very important skill. But if you approach it through a game, then chances are students will be more open to it. They'll learn really without even trying. They'll be learning without even noticing that they're learning. And everybody in the whole room enjoys the experience more and gets more out of it. So that's what I had to share with all of you, and I look very much forward to meeting you all presently on Skype in order to see whether you might have any questions or comments, and also to show you around, if I have a few minutes, the actual website where that I use in order to teach my course. Thank you very much. So at the end of my first video, I was just...
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. First of all, for the nice word about ORCIT. Michelle expects some questions. Do you have questions? Could you please come there because she may not hear? Okay, Michelle, here are some questions. We will conduct them from here. Could you please come up?
Good morning. I don't know what time it is in Canada. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. well, it really beats me how it works, doing or teaching conference interpreting 100%, and giving an MA 100% online. But anyway, if you do it, I can understand. I have some questions. For example, you said that this is conference interpreting, and in the beginning you also said that you have healthcare and court as well. Did I hear it right? How do you blend that in the course? And you also said at some point that you have 24 students. Isn't that a quite large number? Even in class, in a physical classroom, where we have, for example, 10, 12 students, that's quite a large number to deal with. So how do you deal with 24 people in a classroom, even virtual? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for those questions. I don't know if you might have to turn off the microphone there because I might end up getting some feedback and actually hearing myself answer you, which might get a little bit distracting. Yeah, so maybe you could turn off the microphone that's on in the room. But we'll see. If not, I can just speak through my own echo, which should be hopefully not too distracting.
Hear you well. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so just to address some of the points that you raised, and that is, first of all, how do we manage to do it and how does it work? Well, I think the proof is in the pudding, in that our graduates at Glendon have already made it. We haven't gotten any AIIC members yet, but we certainly have a handful of AIIC pre-candidates who are well on the way to becoming AIIC members. We also have graduates who are already working in Canadian institutions and have passed institutional accreditation tests and these sorts of things. Not yet in the European Union, but, well, you know, the language profiles are slightly different here in the EU, and it is across the pond. So that's not necessarily on people's radars when they're graduating from Glendon. But anyway, it really is working, believe it or not. The second question, which actually is something very close to my heart, which is how do we blend the healthcare, the court, and the conference? That's something we have done a lot of thinking about there. It's originally, it was almost like three separate silos where we had our healthcare specialists teaching the healthcare interpreting stream. We had our legal specialists teaching the legal interpreting stream, and we had the conference interpreting specialists like myself and other conference interpreters from around the world teaching the conference stream. And it was actually just last year that we realized that maybe it was just a little bit too much isolation between the three, that there's actually a lot more synergies that you can achieve through maybe addressing cross-cutting issues that do affect the three. So this year we've started to address certain issues that affect the three fields in different ways, but in a common approach. We've started running joint seminars that bring all three of the fields together, where we'll talk about topic A, but from the three angles. And just to give you an example, we'll be running a seminar on ethics in interpreting, and our healthcare interpreter coordinator will talk about ethics in healthcare. Our court interpreter trainers will talk about ethics in the courts interpreting, and I'll be talking about ethics from a conference interpreting standpoint. So actually, it's interesting to see that there's some really, really interesting cross-pollination, if you like, between the three fields. And we've done some looking, and we really don't see anywhere else in the world that has got this sort of an approach where the students are able to learn in the same program the three components. We know, Monterey teaches both, but they're taught separately. La Laguna as well, where I also teach, has also got a community interpreting program at the postgraduate level, which is currently dormant, but which has been going for many, many years and was one of the pioneers in Spain in community interpreting training. But again, it's organized separately from the conference interpreting program. So as far as I know, Glendon really is one of the first to blend the three. And we're learning as we go, but we're really, really benefiting from this sort of cross-pollination, like I said. And the third question, which has to do with the group size. Well, to explain to you how we deal with 24 students, I have to explain one thing which is very important. And that is, I teach what we call the language neutral course, which means I get to see all of the students. and I address things again, conference interpreting from a more language neutral aspect. I don't spend so much time talking about the finer details of Mandarin into English, because obviously I haven't got a lot to say about that. But the students then meet with their language specific instructors just as often as they meet with me. So for every hour they spend with me, they're also spending an hour with, say, their Russian trainer and their Russian classmates, or their Arabic trainer with their Arabic classmates. And those groups are much smaller. For obvious reasons, we have 7 active languages, 24 students. So I think the biggest group right now is maybe the Spanish group, where we've got 7 students, including all of the A's, B's, and a couple of C's, auditors, basically. So there a lot of the brass tacks sort of work, where they really, really are getting into the practice with their language trainer who talks about the specific combination, is done in the same small groups that we're expected to, that we expect in conference interpreting. And again, when I'm working with 24 students, much of the work that they're doing is actually done in groups of 2 and 3. So I'll say to them, get together with your group of 3 this week and do this. And then we'll talk about it when we meet in the group of 24, say. Or I'll meet them as a group of 24 in my classroom, my Adobe Classroom. And I'll use a special feature that exists in the Adobe Classroom, which are called breakout rooms, where you can then place people in little sort of mini classrooms. So I'll give them an assignment and I'll say, okay, we're going to do this for the next 10 minutes. And then again, I'll put them into pairs and I'll have them doing this exercise in pairs. So the volume of students is actually not so much a problem, because so much of the work is done in a smaller group level. The only problem is sometimes one of bandwidth, to tell you the truth. And then that brings us back down to, when technology sometimes gets in the way. But you troubleshoot and you find workarounds when the classroom is struggling under the weight of so many web streams. Those were the 3 questions I heard, and I'm happy to. Oh, let me just say one thing. I'm not actually in Canada at the moment. I live on the Canary Islands, on Tenerife. So I'm only 2 hours behind you. So I only had to get up at 7 o'clock this morning to join the live stream from Thessaloniki.
Thank you, Michelle. Just one more question, because we are lagging behind. And okay.
I can't hear a question, so.
Hi, Michelle. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but if not, it'll be relayed. 2 related questions that came out from Killian Seba's speech yesterday. Killian spoke about the crazy hours of having all students have to connect regardless of their time zones, and the issue of survival of the fittest with connectivity, so people with lower bandwidth not being able to participate as much. How have you addressed those 2 challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you said that Killian mentioned those yesterday during his keynote. It's really a shame that I wasn't able to watch that, but yesterday was a bit of a crazy day because for other reasons. But it's interesting to hear the couple of points that he raised with respect to problems. Crazy hours, yes. Well, when you have students that are based in China, which is exactly 12 hours away from Toronto, then somebody's going to be getting up in the middle of the night. But generally speaking, we try and pick the class time so it suits as many people as possible. Also the trainers, we have a trainer based in California, and it's not maybe necessarily that useful for her to organize a class that might be suitable for students in Europe, but if it's 6:30 in the morning for her, she's not going to be very awake. So we also try and make sure that it's not the teachers teaching at crazy hours. Having said that, I taught a class from 9 to 11 just a couple of days ago, PM for me, which again is not always my freshest time of the day, but you manage. So to answer how do you deal with the crazy hours is you really try and pick that one slot of the day, which tends to be evening in Europe. Late afternoon, evening in Europe tends to be the slot when you cover basically almost everybody, except for somebody who might be in China. But then when the Chinese students meet, then they can pick a slot that suits them better. So again, you remember there's only a couple of courses where you really have to cater for 24 students who might be, in very broadly disparate time zones. All the other groups are smaller, and they then pick times that suit maybe the 3 or 4 people who are in the room. Survival of the fittest, bandwidth. Glendon has been very aware right from the beginning that technology, it's meant to be an ally and not a foe. And they do a lot of work right in the beginning, even in the process of aptitude testing and student intake, to help students understand what the requirements are in terms of quality headsets, quality equipment, wired connections, getting the necessary bandwidth and these sorts of things. Usually students within the first couple of weeks have figured out what needs are, and they adapt to make sure that they have what's needed, which doesn't mean that every once in a while you'll have somebody tuning in from their phone on a train. But they're not going to be doing that on a regular basis and then being the person who never gets anything out of any of the classes. The one struggle we constantly have, and I'll freely admit that, is that the whole problem with the Great Firewall of China, because there are certain things that you simply cannot do if you're located in China. You cannot watch a YouTube video. You cannot access other certain websites. So the Mandarin students are very aware of this, and they tend to have alternate email addresses in place already for when they're in China. And we tend to just work around. I'll work with my Mandarin students by email for the time that they're in China. Sometimes they'll be traveling to visit family, say for a month or 6 weeks. And we just find the workarounds that we need to. But I do agree that, and I'll maybe conclude on just a couple of points. First of all, survival of the fittest when it comes to technology does not always mean survival of the youngest or most tech savvy, because there's always a real mix, and it's not always the digital natives that you would expect to be the ones who are the most at ease with technology. So sometimes the people who are struggling the most are not necessarily people that you would expect to be struggling with technology. But there's always going to be a broad range of technological ability and access to technology as well that you have to deal with. I'll admit it. And the very final point, because I know you're already running late, is when I heard, I think it was Allison this morning, talking about the loneliness of e-learning and the need to create community. I almost want to beg to differ with that and say that I've found that with the community that we've created with our online students, sometimes you end up getting even closer to them than with your face-to-face students. You end up exchanging through so many different channels of communication. As long as those channels are present and active, and you're telling students, where they can communicate with whom, a community ends up building up extremely quickly. And I end up becoming closer with my online students very often than face-to-face students because of that. So the online community is almost more vibrant in some ways than the non-online community. And again, looking at the clock, perhaps I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm afraid we have no more time. We are really running out of time. The only message I wanted to tell you is that all English resources of ORCIT are already finished, the advanced one as well. So you can use all the set. Thanks a lot.
Great, I'll have to check it out then, because I haven't checked that bookshelf out in a few months.